The morning began like every other morning on my ranch, quiet, golden, and mine. The sun had just broken over the ridge, throwing copper light across the still water of my lake. Steam rose in ghostly fingers. The horses grazed along the far bank, and my old bulldog Duke lumbered down the dock beside me, nails clicking against the weathered wood. It was a place that didn't just belong to me. It was part of me. Generations of sweat and labor had carved this land into something sacred. I poured my coffee into a travel mug, pulled out my phone to check the weather, and that's when it happened. My thumb froze mid-scroll. There on the real estate app, bold, as brass, was a listing I had never posted. Exclusive lakeside opportunity, private lake access, my lake, listed for sale. At first I thought it was some kind of glitch, maybe a scam, but the photos hit me like a gut punch. Whoever posted the listing had walked my land, stood right here where I was standing, and snapped photos of my lake, my dock, even Duke lounging by the shoreline. I muttered under my breath, No, this can't be real. But it was. The seer ad described the lake as shared community property, promising future buyers unlimited boating and fishing rights. And the price? $500,000. Someone was trying to sell my blood and bones out from under me before I could process it, Duke growled low in his throat. I looked up, and that's when I saw her, Karen. Every neighborhood has one, but ours had her, the self-appointed queen of the Homeowners Association. Short, sharp bob of blonde hair, lips pinched tighter than a banker's purse, and a red power suit even though it wasn't even 8 a.m. She was marching down the slope with a wooden post slung over her shoulder, and in her other hand, clutched like a sword, a bright white sign that read in bold red letters, "For sale." I nearly dropped my coffee. She stopped right at the water's edge, drove the stake into the ground with a hammer she pulled from her tote bag and dusted off her hands with a satisfied grin. Then she turned, deliberately, locking eyes with me as if daring me to say something. I stormed across the yard, Duke trailing close behind, his hackles up. "Karen!" I barked. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She gave me that smug HOA smile, the kind that says she knows something you don't. "Oh, good. You saw the listing," she chirped, adjusting the lapels of her blazer. "This is step 2. Step 1 was making sure the neighborhood knows this. Lake isn't just yours anymore." My fists clenched at my sides. "This land, this water, every damn fish in it is deeded to me. My family's name is on every survey map back to the 1800s. You can't just sell what doesn't belong to you." Karen tilted her head like she was explaining simple math to a slow child. "Actually, according to the revised bylaws," she made sure to emphasize the word, "all natural water features within HOA boundaries are considered shared amenities, meaning this lake belongs to everyone." She spread her arms wide as if presenting the lake like a prize on a game show. "I'm simply doing what's best for property values." Duke barked once, sharp and angry, and I had to hold his collar. My blood was boiling hot enough to burn through my skin. "Karen, you've overstepped before. Fines, letters, threats. But this is fraud. This is theft." Her grin widened. "No, this is leadership. You've been hoarding a community. Resource for yourself, and I'm making sure it benefits everyone. You should be thanking me." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Thanking you? You trespass on my land, take photos without permission, and list my lake for sale. And you think I should thank you?" She crossed her arms, unbothered. "Well, if you won't listen to reason, maybe you'll listen to the law. And just..." Like that, she pulled out her phone, dialed 3 numbers, and pressed it to her ear. I stared at her in disbelief. "You're calling the cops? On me?" She smirked. "On the man illegally restricting community property access. Yes, I am." For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. This was beyond arrogance. It was a full-scale attack. My sanctuary, my family's heritage, being stolen in broad daylight with a smirk and a phone call. 10 minutes later, I heard the crunch of gravel tires. A county sheriff's SUV pulled up beside my gate. Out stepped Deputy Harris, a tall, broad-shouldered man with kind eyes and a mustache that made him look straight out of a Western. He'd been here before, mostly for noise complaints Karen herself had filed when my nephew practiced guitar on the porch. Karen practically sprinted to him, pointing at me like I was a wanted criminal. "That's him, officer. He's stealing community property. He threatened me and my dog. He's refusing to let us sell the lake." Harris held up a hand. "Ma'am, slow down. Why don't you explain from the beginning?" Karen launched into her rehearsed tirade about HOA bylaws, property rights, and how I was selfishly strangling the neighborhood's potential. Her voice shrill, her hands waving like she was conducting an orchestra of lies. When she finally paused to breathe, Harris turned to me. "Sir, is what she's saying true? Is this lake HOA property?" I pulled a folded piece of paper from my back pocket. The deed. I'd carried it with me ever since the HOA first started sniffing around my land. I handed it over, the paper crackling between my fingers. "Deputy, this ranch has been in my family since before there even was a homeowners association. Every acre, every drop of this water is privately owned. That sign," I pointed at the ground where Karen's for sale board leaned proudly, "isn't worth the cheap paint on it." Harris studied the paper carefully. He scratched his mustache, eyes narrowing, then looked between the two of us. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "this deed clearly shows the property line. The lake is inside it. This isn't HOA land. This man owns it outright." Karen's smile faltered, but only for a second. "That can't be right," she snapped. "The bylaws say—" "The bylaws," Harris interrupted firmly, "don't override county records or state law. And the law says this lake isn't yours to sell." Her face turned a shade of red that almost matched her suit. She stomped her heel into the dirt. "This isn't over," she hissed, glaring at me. "You can hide behind paperwork for now, but the HOA doesn't back down." I stepped closer, my voice low but steady, and neither do I. For a long moment, it was just the three of us, the sign, the lake, and the tension hanging in the cold air like a storm waiting to break. Duke growled again, the sound rumbling deep in his chest. Karen clutched her purse tighter, lips trembling with fury she was trying to disguise as composure. Finally, Deputy Harris sighed, handing me back the deed. "Look, I can't stop her from being difficult, but legally, this land is yours. If she posts another sign, you've got every right to pull it up, and if she keeps trespassing, call me directly." Karen spun on her heel, muttering under her breath, and stormed back up the hill. But not before spitting one final sentence over her shoulder. "Enjoy your little lake while you can. It won't last." I stood there in the dawn light, coffee gone cold in my hand, watching her silhouette vanish against the rising sun. The D for sale sign still jutted from the soil like a splinter in my side. Harris gave me a sympathetic nod, then climbed back into his SUV, leaving me with nothing but silence. But I knew silence didn't last long with Karen, because when someone like her sets her sights on something you love, your land, your peace, your heritage, they don't stop until they've either broken you or you've broken them. And as the morning light spread across the rippling surface of my lake, I realized something that made my jaw set hard. If Karen thought she was starting a war, she was right. The days after the for sale stunt should have been quiet. The lake still shimmered at sunrise, my horses still grazed along the fence line, and Duke still plodded faithfully at my heels. But peace, real peace, that was gone. Karen had declared war, and if there's one thing I knew about her kind, it's that they don't retreat. They double down. It started small, almost laughable. One afternoon, I came back from town to find a bright orange envelope tucked into my gate. "Notice of HOA violation," it read in block letters. The offense? "Unsightly equipment." I frowned, tearing it open. According to Karen, the equipment was my tractor, parked in plain view near the barn. The same tractor my father had driven before me, the same tractor that had tilled these fields for decades. I muttered, "Unsightly. Lady. That John Deere has more history than your entire HOA board." I crumpled the notice and tossed it into the feed barrel, figuring that'd be the end of it. But I underestimated Karen. The next morning, there were 3 more. Noise complaint. Apparently, Duke barking at coyotes at 2 a.m. constituted a violation. Unauthorized structure. My hay shed, built in the 1950s, now considered illegal because it obstructed neighborhood sightlines. And my favorite, animal waste on community land. Karen claimed my cattle had wandered beyond my fence line and soiled the shared trail. Except there was no shared trail. It was my pasture, and the droppings were as natural as the dirt they landed on. By day 3, the bright orange envelopes had become a daily ritual. Stuffed under my doormat, taped to my mailbox, fluttering from my fence posts like flags of war. Each one filled with some new absurdity, written in Karen's stiff, self-righteous handwriting. Deputy Harris stopped by one evening, leaning against his cruiser as I fed the horses. "She's been blowing up the non-emergency line," he said, with a sigh. "Claims your rooster's a public nuisance, says you're running an illegal junkyard. Even tried to report your pond as a mosquito hazard." I shook my head, tossing a flake of hay into the feeder. "And you? What do you tell her?" "The truth," he said with a small grin. "That none of it holds water. But I'll warn you, she's not slowing down. She's building a paper trail. If she gets the HOA board behind her, she'll try to drag you into court." That night, I sat on the porch with Duke at my feet, flipping through a stack of violation notices like a deck of cursed playing cards. My ranch, the place that had once been my refuge, now felt under siege. And the worst part? The neighbors. I started noticing the way they looked at me differently. Whispers at the feed store, hushed conversations at the post office. Mr. Collins, from down the road, a man I'd shared fence repair duty with for years, wouldn't meet my eyes. The Stevens family, who used to wave when they passed by on their evening walks, suddenly crossed to the other side of the road. Karen had been busy. I overheard it one Saturday morning when I walked into the diner for coffee. A group of neighbors, huddled around a booth, voices low but sharp. "She says he's trying to keep the lake all to himself," one woman muttered. "He's always been a bit territorial," another added. "Karen just wants fairness. That lake could raise all our property values." I tightened my grip on the coffee pot, jaw clenched. These weren't just lies, they were seeds, and Karen was planting them everywhere. She went. By the time I got home, another violation notice was pinned to my front door. Improper landscaping. Apparently, the wildflowers along my driveway were unkempt weeds in violation of HOA aesthetics. I ripped it down, but I could still see her face in my mind, smug and satisfied. The war wasn't about bylaws or aesthetics. It wasn't even about the lake anymore. This was personal. Karen wanted to break me, to make an example out of me, to prove that no one, not even the man who owned the land she coveted, could stand against her. That evening, as I walked, the perimeter of my ranch, Duke trotting ahead, I spotted fresh footprints in the mud near the north fence. Too small to be a ranch hand, too purposeful to be a wanderer. Someone had been sneaking onto my land. I followed the tracks to the water's edge. There, half hidden among the reeds, was another sign. Not a "for sale" this time, but a laminated printout, stapled to a post. Notice: community property. Trespassers will be fined. I tore it down, my hands trembling with anger. She wasn't just pushing boundaries anymore. She was planting her flag on my soil. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the old house sounded like footsteps. Every rustle of wind in the cottonwoods felt like Karen breathing down my neck. I sat by the window with a shotgun across my lap, Not because I wanted a fight, but because I knew one was coming, and deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Because when someone like Karen escalates, they don't stop until you're either on your knees or you rise higher than they ever imagined. The peace of my ranch was gone. The HOA had declared me the enemy. And as the stars spread across the sky above my lake, I realized a hard truth. If Karen thought I'd roll over, she didn't know me at all. The third week of Karen's campaign dawned like every other, roosters crowing, mist curling off the lake, Duke thumping his tail against the porch boards as I sipped my coffee. But the quiet never lasted long anymore, not with her around. Heard the engine before I saw her. That high-pitched whine of an SUV that didn't belong on gravel roads. Sure enough, a white Lexus rolled to a stop at the end of my drive, dust cloud billowing behind it. Out stepped Karen, clipboard tucked. Under her arm like it was a weapon, heels clicking sharp against the dirt. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. "We're doing this the easy way today," she announced, striding toward the lake as if she owned the place. Duke growled low, and I put a hand on his collar. "Karen," I said evenly, "you're trespassing again." She ignored me, planting herself right at the water's edge. From her bag, she pulled another one of those laminated sheets, this one reading, "Property subject to HOA authority, proof required." She clipped it to her board, turned on her heel, and marched right up to me. "Well?" she demanded. "Let's see it." "See what?" "The proof, your deed, your documentation. If you really own this lake, show it. Otherwise, we treat it as shared property." I stared at her, stunned by the audacity. "Karen, I already showed Deputy Harris the deed. He confirmed it. I don't answer to you, and I don't answer to your clipboard." Her lips curled into that tight little smile I'd come to despise. "So you refuse? Fine. Then we'll escalate." She pulled out her phone and right in front of me dialed 911. Not the non-emergency line this time. 911. My stomach dropped. "Yes," she said sweetly into the receiver. "This is Karen Whitmore, president of the Lakeside Homeowners Association. I'm at the ranch property by the lake. The owner is refusing to provide proof of ownership and is becoming aggressive. Yes, we need officers dispatched immediately." She paused, casting me a sideways glance, then added, "I fear for my safety." That last line hit me like a punch. I took a step back, my fists curling. "You lying—" She held up a hand, signaling me to stop, and put on a mock distraught face, lowering her voice into the phone. "Yes, he's yelling at me now. Please hurry." When she hung up, she smiled like a cat with cream. "You brought this on yourself." Within 15 minutes, the flashing lights appeared over the ridge. Not just Deputy Harris this time. 2 squad cars, lights spinning red and blue against the pale morning sky. My neighbors noticed too. Doors creaked open, blinds twitched, and slowly, people began drifting out of their houses to watch. By the time the cruisers pulled up, half the cul-de-sac was standing at the edge of my property, murmuring like they were at a parade. Deputy Harris climbed out of the first car, his jaw tight, his eyes heavy with annoyance. Another deputy, younger and unfamiliar, flanked him. Both rested their hands on their belts as they approached. "Morning," Harris said carefully. "Got a call about a property dispute." Again, Karen launched into her speech before I could get a word in. "Officers, thank God you're here. This man is refusing to comply with community regulations. He won't produce proof of ownership and is harassing me on site. He's volatile, and I don't feel safe." Harris rubbed his forehead. "Ma'am, we've already gone over this. I saw his deed myself." The younger deputy looked between us. "Can you produce it again, sir?" Something inside me snapped. "Why should I?" I barked. "I already proved it once. I've got nothing to hide, but I'm not playing this game every time Karen decides she wants attention." The younger deputy stiffened at my tone. The crowd of neighbors whispered louder. Some shook their heads. Others folded their arms, clearly siding with her. Karen clutched her clipboard to her chest like a shield. See? Aggressive. Hostile. Harris held up his hands, trying to calm the storm. Look, both of you, this is getting out of hand. Sir, I'm not doubting you own this land, but every time she calls, it escalates. And if you don't cooperate, it looks bad. For you. The word stung. Not because he was wrong, but because Karen had engineered it perfectly. Make me look like the unreasonable one. Force me into a corner, and let the court of public opinion do the rest. I locked eyes with her, and in that moment, I saw it. The smug little flicker of triumph. She wanted me to lose my temper. She wanted me in handcuffs, so instead, I forced myself to breathe. Slow. Measured. Then I reached into my back pocket, pulled out the folded deed, and held it high for everyone to see. There, I said, voice steady. My family's name, recorded, notarized, legal. This lake, this land, it's mine. Harris glanced over it, then gave a small nod. Checks out. Just like before. The younger deputy seemed relieved. All right then, nothing criminal. Here, just a civil dispute. But the crowd, they didn't disperse. They stared, whispered, judged. Some even pulled out their phones, recording the scene like it was reality TV. Karen wasn't fazed. She looked around at the audience she'd drawn and raised her voice. Fine, he has his paperwork. But ask yourselves, neighbors, is this really how we want to live? One man hoarding a lake while the rest of us are shut out? Is this fair? Is this community? A few heads nodded. Others stayed silent. But the seed was planted again. Deputy Harris gave me a look, one part sympathy, one part warning. Sir, I suggest you call me next time before it gets to this point. Ma'am, he turned to Karen, you can't keep abusing 911. Next time it could result in a citation. Karen gasped, feigning innocence. I was afraid. What was I supposed to do? Use the civil court system, Harris said firmly. Not law enforcement. With that, the deputies turned back to their cruisers. The lights dimmed, the engines rumbled, and soon the gravel was quiet again. But the damage was done. My reputation, my dignity, chipped away under the weight of Karen's theater. Neighbors dispersed slowly, still whispering, still recording, still watching. I stood there with Duke at my side, deed clenched in my fist, feeling the humiliation burn hotter than the rising sun. Karen lingered just long enough to meet my eyes. Clipboard hugged to her chest, lips curling into a whisper I could read without hearing. This isn't over. Then she turned, heels clicking, and sauntered back to her Lexus. I stayed rooted in place, the silence pressing down on me heavier than the law ever could. And in that silence, a resolve hardened inside me. If Karen thought she could weaponize humiliation, fear, and lies to strip me of what was mine, she had another thing coming. Because now it wasn't just about defending my land. It was about exposing her for the fraud she was. And the next time she came at me with lies and clipboards and flashing lights, I'd be ready. The night had settled into its usual quiet, broken only by the soft hum of the fridge in the kitchen and the occasional groan of the old farmhouse settling into its foundation. But inside, the air was thick with tension, not from outside, but from the storm I was brewing within my own mind. I sat at the oak table in the study, piles of dusty deeds, property maps, and HOA meeting minutes spread out like a battlefield. The yellowed edges of documents crunched under my fingertips, each one a relic of decades of ownership disputes, easements, and legal loopholes. My lamp cast a halo of warm light over the chaos, and Duke snoozed at my feet, oblivious to the scheming, in motion. For weeks, Karen had escalated everything. The violation notices, the staged calls to the police, the whispers in the neighborhood. Everything she had done had one goal: to pressure me, to bully me, to make me falter. But now, with the quiet of the night, I had a moment to think, to strategize, and maybe, just maybe, turn the game on her. I traced a finger along the property lines of the neighborhood map, eyes scanning the maze of lots. My own ranch sprawled across the top of the page like a fortress, lake at its center, pastures branching out in neat rectangles. And then I stopped. Karen's property. A modest lot tucked into the northeast corner of the HOA. Her house perched there like a dollhouse, on a pedestal. I had always known the lot was hers legally, but I'd never examined the deed closely. Tonight, curiosity mixed with frustration demanded attention. I pulled out her lot's title from the HOA records, an old, slightly warped copy from the county archives. Finger on the page, I read, "Subject to easement granting access through adjacent property." My heart skipped. I leaned closer, squinting. Yes, there it was. A legally recorded easement that ran directly through my ranch property. The road she used, the gate she walked through, the tiny strip that let her reach her cul-de-sac. It all ran through my land. I whispered to myself, disbelief and glee tangled in the words. No. No way. She can't. But the ink was clear. The easement was conditional. If the rancher owned the adjacent lot, or any lot controlling that easement, her access would disappear. It was a literal legal chokehold, and I held the key. I leaned back in my chair, letting the realization wash over me. For weeks, Karen had treated me as if she held all the cards, flaunting authority, rallying neighbors, making the entire community doubt me. And now, I had a card she didn't even know existed. A slow grin spread across my face. Duke stirred, lifting his head as if sensing the shift in energy. I ran my fingers through my hair and muttered, "You've been playing checkers." "Karen, I've been playing chess." The implications were enormous. The lot wasn't just property. It was leverage, a way to turn the tables on someone who had spent weeks trying to humiliate me. If I acquired that lot, if I could somehow purchase it or gain control, Karen's access to her own property vanished. No road, no gate, no lakefront. Strolls. Just a legal dead end. I grabbed my pen and began making notes, connecting dots between deeds, easements, and HOA bylaws. Each line was a potential move, a way to anticipate her reactions before she even knew the game had begun. This wasn't about revenge yet, not entirely. It was about protection, about asserting that no one, no self-appointed HOA president, could manipulate the law and neighborhood perception to make me feel powerless. But the more I studied, the more I realized the move would sting. And the more I realized the stakes were higher than I'd imagined. Hours passed in the glow of the lamp. I measured distances on the map, compared legal language between the deeds, calculated potential consequences. Every scenario I considered painted the same picture. Karen's confident assault on my property had a vulnerability, and if played correctly, I could checkmate her without ever firing a shot. By midnight, my coffee was cold, my eyes gritty from staring at ink and paper, but I couldn't stop. I traced the easement again, imagining the scene. Karen standing at the end of her driveway, blocked by a gate I controlled, eyes wide in shock. It wasn't enough to humiliate her. It would redefine power in this neighborhood. And yet, I knew I had to be careful. Karen was cunning. She thrived on drama and manipulation. If she suspected my intentions, she'd retaliate faster than I could move. So this had to be surgical, precise, unavoidable. Every step forward had to anticipate her lies, her threats, her theatrics. I leaned back in the chair, rubbing my temples, and realized something else. This wasn't just a legal maneuver. This was a test of patience, strategy, and nerves. She had underestimated me, assumed I would crumble under pressure. She had forgotten one rule. Desperation is a powerful motivator, but so is opportunity. Duke yawned beside me, the old bulldog sensing my victory before I even acted. I spread out the papers in front of me once more, mentally rehearsing every conversation, every meeting, every possible confrontation. I imagined the letters I'd need, the purchase negotiations, the subtle yet undeniable way to tip the balance. By 2 a.m., I had a plan forming. A sequence of moves that, if executed correctly, would leave Karen scrambling while I gained the upper hand, not just legally, but morally and socially. The town had seen her parade of power. Now, they would see the truth. I exhaled slowly, satisfied. The late-night hours had revealed a simple fact. She had made one critical mistake. She assumed that because she was loud, aggressive, and relentless, she controlled the board. But she had left her own property exposed, tied legally to my land, in a way she hadn't realized. And that oversight would change everything. For the first time in weeks, a sense of calm returned. Not peace, not yet, but clarity. I had leverage, strategy, and patience on my side. The scales were shifting, and as the first faint hints of dawn began to streak the sky, I whispered to Duke, "Get ready, boy. It's time to play." Outside, the lake shimmered in the early light, deceptively serene. Inside, a storm of strategy brewed. What had started as harassment, violation notices, and humiliation was now a chess game of high stakes, and I had just found the winning move. Karen had no idea what was coming, and in that knowledge, for the first time in weeks, I smiled. By midweek, the ranch had returned to its deceptive calm. Horses grazed, the lake reflected the sky in perfect serenity, and Duke patrolled the perimeter with casual confidence. But behind closed doors, behind locked gates, and under the glow of the desk lamp, a different kind of storm was brewing. I had spent the past nights tracing legal avenues, double-checking easements, and outlining potential strategies. And now, I had one clear path. A silent, surgical move that could tip the scales in my favor without a single public confrontation. Karen, blissfully unaware, had made herself a spectacle at the last HOA meeting. She'd stood at the podium, chest puffed, gesturing dramatically as neighbors nodded or winced in awkward silence. "We must preserve community access," she'd proclaimed, waving her clipboard like a banner. "Private owners cannot hold the lake hostage." Little did she know, the very lot she stood upon, the one she thought gave her power, was slipping through her fingers. I had discovered a loophole hidden in the county records, a small, overlooked foreclosure lien on her property from a bank. Loan she had assumed was long settled. Legally, it was still actionable. With a discreet back-channel approach through a trusted attorney, I could arrange the purchase quietly, avoiding the usual public sale and delaying notification until the deal was complete. I leaned back in my chair, fingers drumming on the wood, heart steady but racing. This wasn't about anger. It was precision. Every document had to be perfect, every transfer clean. One misstep, one public hint, and Karen would catch wind before the plan was executed. The attorney called mid-afternoon. With confirmation, the lot was available for immediate acquisition under the lien's terms. No announcements, no auctions, no fuss. In one calculated stroke, I could secure control over the easement and, by extension, her access. I smiled to myself, a slow, deliberate curl of satisfaction. "Silent," I whispered, "like a ghost. Like a shadow she won't see coming." Over the next few days, I kept up appearances. I mended fences, fed livestock, and kept Duke occupied along the lakefront. Karen, unaware of the storm gathering beneath her heels, continued her performances. At the next HOA meeting, she lectured about the dangers of private ownership, scolding neighbors for tolerating my alleged monopolization of the lake. Whispers followed her every step, though. Subtle, tentative murmurs from neighbors who had begun to notice unusual activity. A discreet phone call here, a subtle nod there. No one dared confront her directly. They were far too entertained by the drama unfolding in slow motion. Rumors about a potential shift in property ownership circled quietly, a mischievous undercurrent, to Karen's overblown proclamations. By the 5th day, the deal was executed. Karen had no idea. The property, through legal paperwork, handled entirely behind the scenes, was now technically mine. Not yet fully apparent in daily life, but legally undeniable. The easement she relied on for her only access to her home and her beloved HOA podium was now controlled by me. I reviewed the documents late one evening, candlelight flickering against the polished wood of the study. Everything was in order. Deed? Checked. Liens cleared? Checked. Transfer registered? Checked. I exhaled, the tension that had built over weeks finally releasing like the hiss of steam from a pressure valve. Duke stirred at my feet, sensing victory, as dogs do. I smiled down at him. "Quiet," I said softly, patting his head. "We've done it quietly. Let's watch the fireworks." And the fireworks were already beginning, if only in whispers. Rumors spread through the cul-de-sac like wildfire in dry grass. "Did you hear?" one neighbor said to another. "I think something's going on with Karen's property." "Really?" another whispered back, eyes wide. "I wouldn't tell her if I were you. She'd turn it into an HOA circus in a heartbeat." Exactly. No one could spoil the unfolding drama. Karen was too proud, too invested in her own narrative, to see the trap tightening around her until the moment she walked straight into it. Meanwhile, I walked the lake at dawn, Duke trailing. The water reflected the pale pinks and golds of sunrise, deceptively peaceful. I considered Karen's likely reaction when she finally discovered the truth. Confusion, denial, fury, humiliation. But more importantly, she would realize she had lost her leverage. All her theatrics, her staged violations, her calls to the police. Nothing mattered anymore. And I would be there, calm and composed, holding the power she never even suspected existed. I paused at the water's edge, running, a hand through the still cool surface, feeling the quiet strength of my land beneath my fingertips. Every hour of research, every sleepless night, every tense negotiation had led to this. Not a single person knew yet, not a soul outside the documents and my own strategy. The real excitement, I realized, wouldn't be the acquisition itself. It would be Karen's face when she discovered the gate to her own property could be controlled. When she realized that every boast, every violation notice, every dramatic phone call had been building toward a revelation she had never anticipated. By evening, the neighborhood still buzzed with rumors, quiet laughter behind hands, knowing glances exchanged over garden fences. No one dared tell Karen outright. Her ego was too large, and the potential spectacle too delicious. I watched from my porch as she drove past, head high, clipboard clutched, talking animatedly to anyone within earshot about her commitment to community. I didn't flinch, I didn't signal, I only smiled. Because patience, as I had learned in these weeks of escalation and strategy, was a far more dangerous weapon than noise, theatrics, or lies. The right move, made quietly and decisively, could dismantle arrogance without firing. A shot. And that move, that checkmate, was now in my hands. The lake was calm, the moonlight glinting off the water like silver. Duke leaned against my leg, eyes half closed, content. I leaned back, finally allowing myself a moment of satisfaction. The chessboard was set, the pieces in place. Karen had no idea the tide had already turned. The storm was coming, and I would watch it unfold on her doorstep. The morning air was crisp, the sun just beginning to rise over the distant ridges, painting the lake with streaks of gold. Birds chirped as if nothing had changed, but the tension hanging over my ranch was anything but ordinary. Today, everything was about to shift. The legal papers had cleared the night before. Karen's lot, her kingdom, her podium, the lot she had used to wield control over the HOA and parade her authority over the neighborhood, was officially mine. Fully, unambiguously, irrevocably. The paperwork sat on my desk like a crown I had claimed without ever needing to storm a castle. I stepped outside with Duke by my side, taking in the lake's reflective surface. Calm, peaceful, mine. And soon, what had been Karen's access would vanish like a mirage. By mid-morning, the fencing crew arrived. I had planned every detail: materials, placement, legal compliance, every post, every wire, every lock installed with precision. The former easement route Karen had depended on for her daily walks to the lake would now be hers no longer. Her freedom of movement, once taken for granted, would be controlled entirely by my ownership. I watched as the first posts went into the ground, metal clamps glinting in the sunlight. Duke sniffed at the base of each post, his tail wagging slightly as if approving the operation. I surveyed the progress, imagining Karen arriving at her driveway, her eyes widening in disbelief. By noon, the fence was complete. A sturdy barrier, legal and unassailable. The gate was locked, with a sign subtly posted, "Private property, access restricted." And then, like clockwork, she appeared. Karen's Lexus rolled to a stop at the end of her driveway. She stepped out, clipboard in hand, her heels clicking sharply against the gravel. At first, she seemed casual, but the moment her gaze fell on the fence, the smile vanished. Confusion flickered across her face, rapidly replaced by anger. No, this can't be," she muttered, marching toward the barrier. Her voice sharpened as she reached it. "What is this? I have rights. This is my easement, my access. You can't." I walked up, keeping my tone calm, measured. "Actually, I can. Legally, you no longer have rights to this easement. The lot is mine now. That road, that path you've been using, it's private property." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrowing. She waved her hands, as if by sheer force of will she could erase the posts and locks. "This is injustice, fraud. You can't just—" "Watch me," I interrupted, not raising my voice, letting the authority in my words do the work. Neighbors had begun gathering along the edges of the street, drawn by the familiar drama. Some peeked from behind hedges, others parked their cars to get a better view. A hush fell over the cul-de-sac. People whispered, some taking out phones, eager to record the spectacle. Karen's face turned red, her fury growing by the second. She stomped toward the gate, rattling the lock with a hand that shook. "This is harassment. This is abuse of power. The HOA will—" I shook my head. "No, Karen. You abused your power first. You tried to bully the community, harass me, and manipulate neighbors. Every violation notice, every phone call, every staged complaint, you used them to intimidate and control. This is legal, clean, and you're on the losing side." She spun around, pointing her finger at the gathering crowd. "You all see this? This is how he treats community members. This is tyranny." The community remained silent, faces pale, eyes wide. Some shifted uncomfortably, others exchanged glances. They had heard her theatrics before, seen her command the room with dramatic flair. But now, for the first time, she looked vulnerable, exposed. I stepped closer to the gate, holding the deed in one hand, letting it catch the sunlight. Let me make it simple. The lake, the path, the access, all legally mine now. If you try to bypass the fence, it's trespassing, and there's nothing the HOA can do to override the law. Her hands trembled, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. No, you can't just— "Yes," I said simply, watching. Her fury collided with reality. A few neighbors murmured softly. One of the Stevens children whispered to her mother, "She looks like she's about to cry." Karen's face contorted with rage and disbelief. She raised her voice so sharply it carried across the cul-de-sac. "This is illegal! I demand a hearing! I demand—" But the crowd had begun to lose interest. The whispering grew. The phones came out, not to cheer her on, but to witness the collapse of her empire in real time. Even those who had once feared her authority now stood quietly, some smiling with satisfaction at the turn of events. I let her vent, let her scream. There was no need to argue further. The law, the papers, and the fence spoke louder than words ever could. By mid-afternoon, the street was nearly empty, Karen still pacing beside the barrier, her shouting reduced to frantic muttering. I walked the length of the fence, inspecting the locks, making sure every post was secure. Duke followed, his paws crunching against gravel, indifferent to the chaos. Finally, I stopped at the end, looking out over the lake. Calm water. Clear.
Skies. No shouting. No staged signs. No fake violation notices. Just the quiet authority of ownership. Karen let out one last piercing scream before storming back to her car.
The engine roared to life, tires spinning slightly on the gravel. Then she disappeared down the road. The silence that followed was almost deafening. Neighbors peeked from behind hedges, some whispering about the audacity of the move, some nodding quietly in approval. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone had seen it. I walked back to the lake, Duke padding beside me. The fence, the deed, the quiet authority, it all felt right. Not cruel, not petty. Just justice served in a legal, calculated way as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting amber streaks across the water. I knew one thing with certainty. Karen's empire had crumbled, and the HOA had no tools left to reverse it. Every staged violation, every phone call, every attempt to bully the rancher had culminated in a single, undeniable truth. And from the porch of my farmhouse I watched the lake glint in the dying light, finally at peace. The queen had been blocked. The valley had returned to its quiet rhythm. Birds circled above the lake, the wind rustled softly through the cottonwoods, and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface echoed like a heartbeat across the water. Peace had settled over. The ranch, heavier and sweeter than it had in months. I sat on the dock, legs dangling just above the clear water, Duke lying at my feet, nose twitching as he watched the small ripples drift past. The morning sunlight shimmered across the lake, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the weight of constant conflict lift. The property, the land, the water, the paths, was mine. All of it. Every inch legally, irrefutably, undeniably mine. From the corner of my eye, I noticed her. Karen. Staring from behind the locked gate of her former easement, eyes wide, lips pressed tight in a thin, bitter line. She couldn't walk the path, couldn't touch the lakefront, couldn't stage another dramatic phone call or violation notice. Every move she made now was limited, controlled, powerless. I leaned back on my elbows and let a slow smile stretch across my face. It wasn't cruelty that fueled it, not really. It was justice, and the satisfaction of watching arrogance crumble under the weight of truth. Neighbors walked past in pairs or small groups, pretending casual strolls while sneaking glances at the scene. Whispered comments floated through the air like leaves in the wind. Did you see her face? She's blocked? How? I guess the lake really is his now. The murmurs weren't just gossip. They were a reminder. The community had watched. Karen strut with self-assured authority for months, attempting to control their perception, manipulate their opinions, and dominate their valley. And now, the roles had reversed. I reached down to skip a stone, watching it arc across the water and disappear beneath the surface. Each ripple seemed to echo the months of tension, conflict, and strategy that had led to this quiet victory. The lake was calm again, unbroken, untouchable. From behind her fence, Karen's face twisted with every small sound, the laughter of a neighbor greeting me politely, the distant bark of Duke chasing a squirrel, the soft splash of my fishing line, hitting the water. She had lost more than access. She had lost control. I remembered the violation notices, the calls to the police, the staged meetings, and the endless whispers in the cul-de-sac. Every move she had made to intimidate me had only fueled my resolve, sharpened my focus, and ultimately exposed the cracks in her empire. The HOA, once so proud and vocal, had been left impotent. Their rules, bylaws, and authority had crumbled in the face of legality and careful planning. I could almost hear the board members muttering among themselves, shuffling papers, realizing that their star player, Karen, had been outmaneuvered entirely. The sun climbed higher, turning the lake into a mirror of gold and silver. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth on my skin, savoring the absolute stillness. No alarms, no threats, no fake violations. Just the water, the land, and the undeniable satisfaction of having played the long game correctly. Karen's occasional glances across the fence line reminded me of one hard truth. Arrogance blinds the arrogant. The more she believed in her own cleverness, the more vulnerable she became to someone who was patient, strategic, and unshakably determined. I opened my eyes and watched her pacing behind her gate, hands on her hips, stomping small circles of dirt like it could reclaim what was lost. The irony was thick and sweet. Months of intimidation, of asserting dominion, of trying to rally neighbors to her side, all undone by a calm, calculated move executed quietly while she boasted in public. Duke nudged my hand, bringing me back from reflection. I scratched behind his ears, and he let out a satisfied sigh, tail wagging lazily. He had been a silent witness to every stage of this saga, the calls, the notices, the confrontations. And now, like me, he could finally rest. I stood and walked along the dock, toes just skimming the water, feeling the coolness lap against my skin. Every plank underfoot felt solid, permanent, a reminder that what was mine by right could also be mine by foresight. Karen had underestimated me, underestimated the law, underestimated the patience of someone who refused to be bullied. From the edges of the community, neighbors waved quietly, some with small smiles, some with knowing nods. No applause, no fanfare, just the acknowledgement that justice, when executed cleanly and decisively, needed no spectacle. And Karen? She remained trapped behind her fence, an ironic monument to hubris. Every shout she let escape bounced harmlessly against the barriers I had installed. Every dramatic glare aimed at the lake fell flat. Every frustrated movement reminded her, and anyone watching, that control had shifted entirely. I returned to the dock, sitting again at the edge, legs dangling. The sun reflected brightly on the water, turning it into molten gold, and I thought about the weeks of escalation, the careful legal maneuvers, the quiet research that had uncovered the key to her downfall. It had all led here, to this moment of stillness and quiet triumph. It wasn't just revenge. It was a lesson carved into the land itself. Arrogance, when unchecked, leads to ruin. Authority, when wielded without justice, collapses under scrutiny. And patience, strategy, and a steady hand can turn even the most powerful adversary into a footnote in a story that will be remembered by the community for years. I leaned back once more, letting the warmth of the sun and the reflection of the lake fill me with contentment. The valley was quiet, the water undisturbed, and the land, for the first time in months, was at peace. Karen's empire had fallen, her influence diminished, and the HOA had been left humbled and exposed. All that remained was the lake, the ranch, and the enduring reminder that power taken for granted can vanish in an instant if one underestimates those who refuse to be intimidated. Duke yawned, stretched, and settled at my feet. I reached down, scratching behind his ears, watching the ripples of the lake spread across the surface. The silence of victory was absolute, unbroken by complaints, threats, or staged accusations. From behind her fence, Karen's eyes followed, every move, every calm gesture. Her empire was gone, Her control evaporated, and her attempts to manipulate or bully had ended in failure. She had nothing but the bitter taste of defeat, while the lake and land stood as silent monuments to patience, persistence, and justice. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension of weeks finally release. The valley had returned to its peaceful rhythm. The lake shimmered, reflecting the sky and the surrounding hills, a mirror of calm that had survived every attempt to claim it unfairly. And as the sun climbed higher, bathing the ranch in golden light, I knew one truth above all: the land remembered. Every fence post, every deed, every carefully executed strategy left a permanent mark, a lesson for anyone foolish enough to underestimate the power of patience, foresight, and resolve. Karen remained behind her fence, trapped by her own hubris. I remained on the dock, guardian of my lake, calm and unshaken. The neighborhood whispered, watched, and learned. The lake glimmered quietly, carrying the memory of conflict, the weight of strategy, and the unspoken lesson: arrogance, no matter how loud, eventually meets its match. And finally, after months of turmoil, the ranch and the valley itself was at peace.